These very hyper border collie puppies and I are going to go get some firewood, and I want to show you a couple things about splitting firewood. Okay, so just a few basic things on splitting wood. One, a lot of people I have seen will put a log directly on the ground to split it. I prefer to have what I call a chopping block, like this, real knotty piece of wood here. The reason for that is the ground is much softer than that piece of wood is, and when you hit what you're trying to split, if it's on the ground is going to absorb a lot of the force of your blow. But if you have it on a chopping block like that, there's more resistance there, and it's going to put more of the power of your swing into your actual split. Of course, most people would imagine that splitting something like that is a lot harder than, say, splitting something like that. And the reason is because there's a smooth grain. Now, there are some woods that are much easier to split than others. I have found that the gums and even sycamore can be hard to split. But a straighter grain like poplar, oak, walnut, woods that have a straighter grain are much easier to split. Beech can be, oh booger, you can see that. It's not as straight grain. It tends to swirl more than to be just a straight grain. Red oak and white oak and hickory and ash are fairly easy to split if they don't have knots. Typically with hardwoods, when you cut it down, you want to cut it up. Because the more it cures, the harder it gets. Now, this wood right here was given to us. It's leftovers and end pieces from a logging crew that came through our neighbor's property, and so that's why we ended up with all these pieces with knots in them. We've already pretty much split up the pieces that are easier to split. Well, Kaylin has. My splitting days are almost over because I have trigger fingers so bad. But anyway, so we haven't been able to, we weren't able to split this when it was green, so we're having to deal with it when it's more cured. This has probably been cut for a little over a year now, and so it's a little harder to deal with. This right here is a piece of poplar. Poplar is a wood that, if you haven't seen our Firewood Facts video, I encourage you to watch that if you have questions about what kind of wood to use for what kind of fire. Poplar is a good wood to use if you need a fast, light, a quick burn, a quick hot burn. I like to use poplar and dogwood and trees like that, maple, soft maple, for a good quick morning fire. But I want to show you something on this, and you can see there's a check or a crack right in here. When you're splitting, if you'll aim for those cracks like that where the wood is already dried down a little bit and has a natural crack, if you can hit on that, you're gonna have a lot better chance at splitting on your first blow. Another thing, you see this has got a big knot down there at the bottom. If you were to try to split that from that end, it'd be much harder than splitting from this end where the knot and getting a momentum going down into the wood, so that you have the force pushing the grains apart, as opposed to wherever there's a knot like that, the grain is very swirled together and it's much harder to split. Now, another key for splitting wood is that the best time actually to split wood is when it's below 32 degrees. And the reason for that is the wood is more brittle. If there's moisture in the wood, it's much colder, and the wood is going to snap apart much better than if you try to do it in warmer temperatures. Pieces like that right there that have a lot of knots and stuff, and like this one that have, you can see double knots in the end of that, 2 knot heads right there. But you can see the double knots and stuff. Pieces like that, it's still sitting here for a reason. A lot of times we just get the chainsaw out. Now you can get wedges and stuff like that and split with a sledgehammer, and that does work. If I have to work that hard for a piece of wood, I'm just going to get the chainsaw out. I just, got better things to do with my time and energy. But if you're young and just want to show your manhood, have at it. But anyway, that's just a few tips that I wanted to show you on actual splitting of firewood. And also when they call it ricking up wood, I guess because a rick of wood is a certain amount of wood. When you rick up wood in a freestanding pile like this, of course it is leaning on the barn wall a little bit. If you do what's crosshatch on the ends here, you see how these bottom ones are one direction, and then the next one is one direction, and then this one is one direction. If you will crosshatch on the ends like that, it sort of behaves as a post on the end. So if you crosshatch both ends, and then you can free stack in the center part. And another thing, whenever I stack wood outside, if it's not going to be covered, I try to make it always a habit, just so that I do it as a habit, to stack with the bark up. And that will help the firewood to shed water a little bit better, so that it doesn't get quite as wet. So we got a mess of wood yet to split, but thank the Lord, this was free wood. Our neighbors, like I said, they had some logging done, and they let us have the end pieces, so that was a blessing. Another thing, when you're splitting poplar, like, it's a really good wood for kindling. And what you want to do is take of course, that'd be longer. These were cut short because our firebox is about 17 inches max. Well, 18, but we try to keep our stuff under 17. But you'll notice how straight grain the poplar is. It tends to grow very tall and straight without too many limbs. But if you take like a boy's axe, I don't have a boy's axe, but this is just a big old clunky axe, and just cut it into pieces about yay big, it makes excellent kindling for a really fast fire, like in the morning or when you just need to heat the house up in a hurry. And it's poplar because it's got that yellowish, sometimes it's a little greenish on the inside, and then you could tell the bark. By the way, the inner bark of the poplar makes a really good fire tinder if you need to use it for kindling, like if you're starting a flint and steel fire, or if you're trying to start a fire even in your fireplace. It makes a very excellent tinder.